In that moment, I realized they never saw me, or my son, as family. The dining room was bathed in warm sunlight filtering through towering windows, making everything look even more perfect than it actually was. The walls were lined with expensive family portraits and shelves of curated Christmas decor, faux elegance that masked very real poison. The chandelier above flickered with crystal reflections, as if trying to distract from the moment unraveling beneath it. I had been watching my son eat quietly, his little hands neatly using the knife and fork like I'd taught him. He was proud of that, I could tell. That pride crumbled in an instant. "Grandma says you're the Maid's kid." The words came from my 5-year-old niece, whose Santa-themed dress matched her shiny shoes and blonde ringlets. She said it with the violent innocence that only children are allowed to have, parroting hate they don't yet understand. The silence that followed was deafening. Forks froze. Eyes shifted. A single nervous chuckle cracked from my sister-in-law, followed by the mother-in-law's forced laughter. "Oh dear, kids. They do pick up the funniest things. Funny?" My son looked at me with wide, confused eyes. He knew it wasn't funny. He's only 7, but he already knows when he's being talked down to. His brown skin, his big hair, the way he didn't blend into their polished little world, he noticed. Children always notice. I looked straight across the table at my mother-in-law. Her glass of red wine was held mid-air, but she wasn't drinking. She was waiting to see if I'd make a scene, if I'd embarrass her. A slow, satisfied blink crossed her face. Subtle. Cruel. My husband sat next to me, his hands crumpling the napkin in his lap. He didn't speak. He didn't even look at me. I had never felt more unsupported in my life. I placed my fork down. Not hard, not loud. Just final. Then I turned to my son, using the softest voice I could manage. "Come walk with me for a second, sweetheart." He slid off the tall chair silently. His eyes dropped to the floor. Not quite tears. Just that early kind of heartbreak where the world starts teaching a child that love doesn't always come with kindness. We walked past the roaring fireplace, past the velvet stockings with everyone's embroidered names, except our own, of course, and I held his small hand tightly. In the hallway, I knelt beside him. "Do you know who you are?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He just stared at the floor as if he were trying to make himself disappear. "You're my son. You're brave and brilliant, and what people say when they're afraid or mean has nothing to do with your worth." He nodded, almost too choked to speak. "But I thought Grandma liked me." That one sentence felt like a punch to the ribs, because so many times I'd told him she did. I didn't want him to grow up believing what I knew. That for some people, love is conditional on skin tone, on status, on bloodlines they pretend are pure. "She doesn't know how to be fair," I finally said. "That doesn't mean you have to believe what she says." He asked if we had to go back in. I paused, my face still hot with humiliation. But I wasn't going to let them chase me out of a room again. Not this time, so yes, we did go back. I sat down, smiled calmly, and passed a plate of rolls like nothing had happened. If anyone expected me to blow up or cry, I gave them nothing. Because silence is disarming, and I had just realized that playing nice hadn't earned me respect. I needed to show them who they'd underestimated. It started like one of those whirlwind, too-good-to-be-true love stories you read in paperbacks near the checkout line. I was working the front desk at a boutique hotel just outside the city. Minimum wage, long shifts, aching feet by closing. He was in town for a corporate event, all pressed linen, charm, and the careless confidence of someone who'd never worried about splitting the check. When he asked me out, I laughed. Not because I didn't want to say yes, but because I didn't think he was serious. "You sure you meant to ask the receptionist and not the woman in heels behind me?" I joked. He smiled like I'd intrigued him just by acting surprised. One date turned into 10. Then I was at his summer house. Then, meeting his parents. That's when the invisible walls started closing around me. His family never said anything outright, but it was always in their eyes, their pauses, their strategic compliments. His mother greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, "I love that you're so naturally pretty. Not too much makeup, it's refreshing." I was wearing lipstick, and she knew it. His father shook my hand like he was inspecting something secondhand. asking me what my parents did, without ever asking about them. Still, I thought I could win them over. I brought wine to family dinners, found thoughtful gifts, laughed at jokes I didn't find funny. I played the good future daughter-in-law, but I was never really in. Not the way I thought I'd be. When we got engaged, his mother didn't cry tears of joy. She pursed her lips and asked if we'd be signing a prenup. "Just a formality," she added with a practiced tone. I remember nodding and forcing a smile, knowing I'd signed plenty of forms in my life. Just never one that measured someone's love in assets. Our wedding was beautiful, but selective. His family controlled everything: venue, guests, menu. My parents were seated near the back, and no one could recognize their last name among the others. I chalked it up to logistics, not disrespect. I was desperate to belong. That's the thing about being from the outside. You start bending so much, you don't even notice when you're being erased. We moved into one of his family's investment properties when our lease expired. Again spun as generosity. Again, another leash. I thought perhaps, once we had a child, the way they looked at me would change. It did, but not the way I'd hoped. When our son was born, I will never forget holding him in my arms. This warm, dark-eyed miracle that looked like both of us, but also new. Beautifully and uniquely his own. He had my curls, my nose, my shade, and the first time my mother-in-law came to visit, she held him for just 5 seconds before saying, "Oh, I wasn't expecting that complexion. He's distinctive." It felt less like a comment and more like a warning. Over the following weeks, I noticed more. Comments about sunscreen, about managing his hair while he's still young so it doesn't get wild, about how ambitious genes hopefully come through from their side. They never posted photos of just him. Always group shots where he was cropped at the edge or facing away. At first I thought I was being overly sensitive, but my mother noticed it too. She pulled me aside once and asked gently, "Do they treat him like family?" The answer sat like a rock in my chest. I told myself he'd win them over, the way I'd tried to. That maybe the problem wasn't us, it was still early. But the thing about people who see you as less is that you can't earn your way into enoughness. Not when they're invested in the illusion that they were always more. I became the outsider they politely smiled at, consulted only when absolutely necessary. I didn't match their aesthetic. Our son couldn't be paraded like a trophy. We were tolerated ornaments on their perfectly polished shelves, and as the years wore on, my tolerance began to fray. It wasn't just the dinners or the comments. It was the tension in my husband's shoulders every time I asked if we could celebrate a holiday my way. It was the way he stayed silent when I needed someone to tell his mother she'd stepped out of line. It was the realization that he may not see it, but I now saw everything, and it all came into focus clearly, blindingly, at that Christmas table. When a 5-year-old echoed what no one else had dared say aloud. My son's name is Micah. It's simple, soft, biblical. I chose it during a quiet moment in the hospital, right after he was born, when the world was cracked open and new. He blinked up at me with these wide, searching eyes, and I whispered it to him like a secret. Micah. It settled into the air like it had always belonged to him, but it never belonged to them. From day one, my in-laws turned his name into a shrug. Miku, they said. Micah? Overpronounced, undercared. I corrected them, gently at first, firmly later. But they always found a way to mess it up again, always passive, always forgetful, like his very identity was a challenge they couldn't be bothered to get right. Why not just Michael? His grandmother asked once with a smile that bit behind her teeth. It's easier for everyone. For them, she meant. Worse than the mispronunciations were the comparisons. At every gathering, Micah became the yardstick they measured their more refined grandchildren against. Isn't it funny how Olivia's already reading full sentences? You know, at her age, Henry was reciting multiplication tables, they'd say, right in front of Micah, like he was just background noise. I saw my son shrink a little inside himself each time. One Thanksgiving. Olivia showed everyone a crayon drawing of a stick figure family. The whole table clapped. Grandma kissed her and posed for a photo with the picture held high. Micah had quietly colored a tree with roots and stars. He'd even written thankful across the top in wobbly handwriting. He held it up to his aunt with a shy smile. "Oh," she said, That's abstract. Then she put it face down next to the bread rolls. These weren't explosions. These were cuts. Tiny cruelties wrapped in pleasantries. But they accumulate. Family photos were the worst. I used to arrive early, dress Micah in coordinated neutrals, slick his curls with leave-in. But then came subtle shufflings. A cousin would be pulled front and center. Micah might be turned sideways or placed at the end. One year, the email with the family photo came without him in frame at all. Oh, he must have moved just before the photo, they claimed. Kids, you know? Funny how he never managed to move in any other pictures. At first, Micah didn't notice. Then he did. Slowly. Quietly. Like snow piling in corners unnoticed until it hardens into ice. He stopped volunteering to show his drawings. He stopped asking to sit with his cousins. Sometimes he even looked at himself differently after a long visit, and I hated myself for letting it happen. For biting my tongue. For not dragging them straight into the truth, that their disdain wasn't casual. It was calculated, smiling to your face while making sure your child never felt like he belonged. Eventually, Micah started asking if he could stay home instead of going to their house. And maybe that's when I broke a little more, because he shouldn't have to shield himself from people who claimed to love him. They avoided his name, mispronounced it, reshaped him into something forgettable. But it wasn't his name that was hard for them. It was him, existing as undeniable proof that their world wasn't as pure or perfect as they pretended. The gift exchange had always been a performance. Loud squeals, Instagram-worthy wrapping paper, exaggerated gasps of, "You shouldn't have," that fluttered through the room like scripted lines. But this time I didn't try to fit in. I just sat back, watching it all unfold, gripping my teacup like it might keep my mouth shut. Micah sat beside me, legs crisscrossed under his little body, trying his best to follow the rules I'd taught him. Say thank you, no matter what. Smile, even if it's something you don't like. Don't make people uncomfortable. They didn't deserve how well he listened. Olivia tore through her metallic pink box with diamond glitter bows, a custom wrap job no doubt done by some assistant. Inside was a brand new latest-gen iPad, sparkling silver, complete with a keyboard case. Everyone clapped. "Oh, you are so spoiled." Her grandma laughed as she leaned over to help her set it up. Micah blinked slowly, his tiny hand still resting on the medium-sized box he'd been holding for 10 minutes. It was the only one left on his lap. Brown paper, no name tag, wrapped with thin green ribbon, the kind you'd use to decorate a fruit basket. He gave me a quick sideways glance before pulling the ribbon loose. He peeled back the paper with careful fingers. I saw it before he did, a cheap plastic race car, neon orange, something from the clearance bin at a pharmacy, a toy he'd outgrown 2 years ago. "Oh, that's from Grandma," my sister-in-law chimed in. "A classic boy toy. She knows how much boys love their cars." "Oh, wow," Micah said gently, lifting it like it was made of glass. "Thank you." He didn't look at me. That was the part that gutted me most. He didn't need to. He could feel the weight of everything in my silence. I stared at the car, the crooked sticker already peeling on its side, and then I looked up and saw her. His grandmother was sipping red wine now, her lipsticked mouth curled into a proud little smirk. Not one of love, one of triumph, like she had managed to take one more thing from him without moving an inch. I pressed my lips together so hard they went numb. He deserved better. He'd always deserved better. Micah set the car on the floor and leaned against my side, just enough to let me know he knew. And he was trying to be brave, trying not to make it worse for me. That was the worst part of being in rooms like this. It teaches children how to carry shame that was never theirs. They moved on quickly after that, gushing over a box of designer scarves and rare whiskey someone brought from Japan. No one mentioned the car again. No one asked Micah what he liked. No one noticed the widening silence between him and the glittering pile of privilege just a few feet away. I wanted to take his hand, stand up, and walk out. I almost did, but something in me stopped. Something colder, older, quieter. This wasn't the moment I'd make a scene. They'd expect that. They'd want that. To prove I was dramatic, unstable, too sensitive. No, I sat still. I gathered each passive-aggressive word and calculated cruelty in the tight space behind my teeth. Because that's the thing about being Underestimated in a room like that. They don't realize that. Silence can be the sharpest blade, and while they laughed over Olivia's tech gifts and planned Aspen ski trips they'd never invite us to, I already knew. This wouldn't be the last Christmas we spent with them. It would be the last where we came unarmed. I used to tell myself he wasn't the problem. He wasn't cruel, he wasn't cold, and in most ways, he was good to us. He remembered anniversaries, brought flowers without occasions, helped pack school lunches on Mondays. But the trouble with good men who are quiet is that they often go silent when it matters most. And in his silence, his mother's voice always won. The first few years of our marriage, I chalked it up to family dynamics. She just has strong opinions, I'd say. Or, that's how old-school families work. I thought love meant tolerance. I thought being patient would earn us peace. But time and motherhood changed that. I started noticing it more after Micah was born. Every big decision had to pass through her before being validated. Where we lived, where we sent him to preschool, what kind of stroller we bought. My husband didn't always agree with her, but he always listened. Too much. And then he'd turn to me and say, "It's just easier this way." Easier for who? When Micah was 2, I wanted to throw him a birthday party at a park near my old neighborhood. Somewhere simple, filled with people who actually knew us. His mother offered her house instead, said she'd handle everything, and promised it would be no trouble. It quickly spiraled into a catered production, with rented crystal and a guest list that excluded half my friends. Barely recognized half the people there, but she was thrilled. "I told you she knows how to plan events," my husband said, rubbing my back with one arm, balancing a flute of Prosecco in the other. That was the first time I felt invisible in my own life. But it wouldn't be the last, because moments like that kept happening. Like when I wanted to return to work part-time, and she said, at dinner in front of everyone, "Well, if you two need the extra money, I'm sure we can help support things." My husband laughed. No one corrected her, not even when I set my fork down a little harder than necessary. Or when Micah brought home a drawing of his school family tree project, and she said, "Oh, honey, shouldn't we fix this?" Our side of the family tree is missing surnames. I looked over and saw that the branch with my parents, my entire ancestry, had been erased by omission. And my husband, seated just 2 feet away, just changed the subject. It finally clicked. He wasn't defending me because he didn't see the offense. Or worse, he didn't want to see it. Because to see it meant doing something uncomfortable, and discomfort was something he'd never learned how to handle. He loved us. I had no doubt of that. But he loved peace more, and in his version of peace, I was collateral. Every slight from his mother, every mispronounced name, every gift that separated Micah from his cousins, every family photo that conveniently left me out. He let it all slide with a shrug. Or worse, he'd tell me later in the privacy of our bedroom how wrong it was. How he'd talk to her next time, but next time always came. And nothing ever changed. Over time, small cracks appeared between us. Invisible on the outside, but I could feel them spreading, like walking across a frozen lake. Hearing the distance between footsteps and shatter grow smaller. I remember once, on a night like any other, he reached for me in bed and I turned away, not out of anger, but out of numbness. He asked gently, "Are you okay?" I didn't even know how to answer. How do you explain that you're tired from being invisible in your own home? That you've spent years watching your child become a second-class citizen in his own bloodline? We weren't fighting, but we weren't falling back in love either. Then came Christmas. That gift, that plastic car, that awful comment about the maid's kid, and my husband, still saying nothing, just rubbing his temple like he had a headache instead of a conscience. Later that night, after everyone had finally shut up and gone to sleep, I crept into the guest room, pulled out my phone, and sat on the edge of the bed in that heavy silence only resentment creates. And I typed 7 words I never imagined myself typing. That night, I texted a divorce attorney. Grief in that family is performative. Expensive suits, practiced tears, long speeches read from folded parchment. When my father-in-law passed, the service felt less like a goodbye and more like a press conference. Crystal caskets, invitation-only receptions, glossy programs with his face airbrushed younger than he ever looked. They called him a legacy builder, a visionary, a patriarch. No one talked about the man who used to sneak Micah sugar cookies after dinner, or who helped him plant tulips in our small shared garden outside the city. They didn't know that he used to hum when he stirred his tea, that he once whispered to me during a quiet weekend, "You're the only woman in this family who looks people in the eye when they speak." He saw the truth, even if he never said it aloud in a room full of people. After the funeral, the vultures descended. There were whispered meetings and side texts between siblings. Everyone suddenly remembered a promise he'd made. Property talks surfaced, stocks, accounts, assets. His wife barely waited a week before calling the family lawyer about which house was going where. I wasn't included in those conversations, which is why it shocked me when an email showed up with my name in the CC line. A misclick, I figured, but my curiosity got the better of me. I opened the attachment expecting another schedule for the estate meeting. Instead, it detailed a section of the will no one had mentioned. A sealed private trust. A name at the top. Micah Elias Bennett. I stared at the screen like it had spoken. The clause was simple and quiet. Set up by my father-in-law 2 years prior, it stated that a portion of his undeclared investments, including a modest property in the mountains, an untouched development lot, and 2 high-yield portfolios, would be transferred into a trust for Micah, with me as the acting trustee until he turned 25. It bypassed everyone else. No mention of the other grandchildren. No stipulations from the grandmother. No signatures from his children. Just Micah. He named my son as his primary beneficiary to the most protected assets he apparently owned. I felt a chill crawl across my skin. None of them knew. I reread the line again and again. I double-checked who the email was intended for. Some assistant must have assumed I was involved in the admin threads. They had clicked too fast, and now I held something far more powerful than any of them could imagine. Proof. Trust. Legacy. Micah. Was the one he believed in. I thought about that race car. That box of cheap plastic. I thought about Olivia and her iPad. About crooked name tags and cropped family photos and a 5-year-old girl parroting poison across a Christmas table. And yet it was my son, the Maid's kid, who now held a future they hadn't planned for. I could hear it already. The excuses. Dad must not have been clear. Mom didn't know about that clause. We should challenge it. It's probably a mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. It was intentional, tucked away like treasure, meant to be found eventually, but not like this, turns out. The Maid's kid was the only one his grandfather trusted. And suddenly, I wasn't the outsider anymore. I was the gatekeeper. It's strange how someone can die and still say the one thing you've been aching to hear your whole life. I didn't remember when, exactly, things began to shift with my father-in-law. He was a man of measured words and careful silences. The kind you'd nearly forget was in the room until he'd clear his throat and offer a quiet observation that stuck with you for days. At first, he treated me like a formality. The polite smile, the brief nod, the way you acknowledge a hired event planner. Friendly, but distant. But Micah changed that. He used to watch us from the porch on Sundays, me kneeling in the flower beds while Micah babbled beside me, pulling weeds and narrating his own imaginary universe. Once he surprised us with gardening gloves in Micah's size. Figured he should have a pair of his own, he said. No one else noticed things like that. No one else really saw us. After I discovered the will, I started digging beneath the surface the family worked so hard to protect. I contacted one of the junior attorneys, discreetly, carefully, and asked for clarification on the Glenmount property listed in the trust. That's when the second envelope came. Inside was a folded letter, not typed, inked in gentle, shaky handwriting. Evelyn. Not everything that's passed down survives the way we hope. Sometimes it needs to be redirected. You were never loud. But I watched. I saw the way you kept dignity in the face of dismissal. I saw the way your son looked at you. The kind of love you can't fake. You stood taller in silence than most do in power. The Glenmount house was going to be Olivia's. But I changed my mind. I've watched how your boy gets treated. He deserves more than scraps. So do you. You'll get called lucky for this. But you and I, we both know luck had nothing to do with it. Protect him. G. Bennett, I read it 3 times, hands trembling. His words burned through every memory of being talked over, mispronounced, erased from photos. He saw me, not just as Micah's mother, not just as his son's wife, but as a person worth trusting with legacy. He saw how much silence cost me, and he honored it. The Glenmount property wasn't just bricks and windows. It was a fully developed 3-bedroom home in one of the fastest-growing parts of the state. Added to it, the rights to lease the land, a renewable income source for Micah's future education. And he named me trustee, not my husband, not a corporate executor. Me. I sat at the kitchen counter that day with the letter beside my tea, staring at Micah's homework on the table, his backpack leaning heavy against the chair leg, and I cried, not loudly. No sobs, just tears that came from somewhere deep, relief maybe. Or the slow release of being believed. All the years I spent shrinking myself to keep their peace. All the rooms I walked into and felt disposable. All that armor I carried for Micah so he didn't feel those same barbs pierce through. And now, someone had finally said, I see what you've done. And it mattered. He handed me a future they never would have. He gave me a weapon they didn't even know existed. A generational shift, placed quietly in my palms. Micah didn't understand why I hugged him longer that day. Or why I whispered, your grandpa really did know who you were. But one day he will. Because this gift wasn't just about money. It was proof. And it was protection. And for the first time in years, I felt something I had forgotten how to name. Safe. They called it a family meeting, but everyone in that room knew what it really was. A land grab dressed in sympathy. My sister-in-law sent the invite, one of those smug reply-all emails ending in, would love everyone's thoughts. The meeting was set for Sunday, brunch hour, of course, at Gwendolyn's house. Not my house, never mine. The subject line had read, Dad's Glenmount property, transition and next steps. No mention of Micah, no mention of me. I didn't reply. I didn't confirm or decline. I just showed up quietly and on time, not because I was expected, but because I had every right to be there. They were already seated when I arrived. My husband's siblings, their spouses, and their mother, perched king-like at the head of the table, holding a stylized folder of printouts. My husband looked uncomfortable, like he'd just been scolded before I walked in. I took a seat at the farthest end. No one stood. No hellos. The air shifted the moment I sat down. We didn't think you'd be joining today, my mother-in-law said, all pleasant venom. There's some legal interpretation involved. It may be a bit dense, I smiled flatly. I'll manage. They launched into the plan, fast talking over croissants and spreadsheets. They each had some vision for the Glenmount house. Leasing it to a friend in commercial real estate, flipping it as a family-owned B&B in honor of Dad, or tapping it into an Airbnb revenue model they could all share. All, meaning them. While they argued politely over percentages and property insurance, I reached into my tote and pulled out a slim folder, the one with the signature none of them had seen. My hand rested on it for a moment as I listened to Olivia's dad explain how weekend packages could include wine tours, and then I slid it, gently, across the table. Silence. What's this? Gwendolyn asked, already annoyed. I met her eyes directly. The actual trust documents. From Dad's legal team, signed and finalized before any of this. Confusion tightened her face. She glanced toward her lawyer husband, who picked up the papers and began scanning. Then his face dropped. I said nothing. I didn't need to. My mother-in-law reached for the folder, and I let her. I wanted her to see it, every line. Every line she assumed would belong to her. Her mouth parted. This says it's in Micah's name. I said, voice even. And I'm the trustee, sole. There's no partnership clause. No co-management. That, he didn't tell us that, she snapped. Apparently, he didn't need to. My sister-in-law tried to step in. There's gotta be a misunderstanding. Dad always said this property would go to the grandkids collectively. And he changed his mind, I answered calmly. 2 years ago, to be exact. No one moved. I leaned forward slightly, voice low but sharp. Actually, I hold full rights to that property, and its revenue. Micah will benefit from it entirely when he comes of age. Until then, I'll be managing it. The room fractured. Gwendolyn dropped her fork. Her husband leaned back in his chair with a stunned exhale. One cousin muttered, "What the hell?" while my husband stared at the laminated wood table like it might save him. My mother-in-law tried one last pivot. "It's not about the money," she said. "This was about family unity." I almost laughed. "Unity? You called my son the maid's kid." Silence again. "Don't pretend to cry unity when you spent a decade erasing us from it." I gathered my folder, placed it neatly back in my bag, and stood up. I came today so everything would be clear. Now it is, no yelling, no glass-breaking speeches. Just truth dropped cold and clean on their white marble floor. As I turned to leave, I caught my husband's eye. He looked like a man watching a train leave with everything he forgot to protect. And I didn't feel an ounce of guilt. Only peace. Because in that moment, I wasn't the outsider anymore. I was the one holding keys they never dreamed I could touch. He didn't say a word for the first half of the drive home. It was late afternoon by then, the low sun slicing through the windshield like judgment. He gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, and every so often, he'd clear his throat like he was preparing to speak, but the words never followed. Just silence, weighted, awkward silence. Eventually, I broke it. "You knew about the meeting and you didn't tell me until the night before." He blinked. "I didn't think it was something you'd want to be part of." "Don't do that," I said sharply, turning to face him. "Don't play neutral. You knew exactly what they were planning. You just didn't expect I'd have anything to bring to the table." He kept his eyes on the road. "Mom said it would be informal. Just a conversation," Mom said. I repeated it like it was foreign, ugly. And that's when I saw what I hadn't wanted to see for years. He was wound around her logic like thread on a spool, tangled in a web of generational shame, expectation, and quiet misogyny that had been passed down through polite dinner tables and passive-aggressive raised eyebrows. She had groomed him to see me as temporary, soft, pliable, replaceable. But never equal. "She told me 2 years ago you were drifting," he muttered, "that I should start keeping records. Emails, dates. She said if it came to, she just didn't want Micah caught in." I turned and stared. "Are you saying your mother encouraged you to build a case against me?" He didn't answer. And the fact that he didn't, that he wouldn't even fight for her innocence, told me everything I needed to know. She thought if Dad died, I'd walk away with what? Her scarf collection? He closed his eyes for a long moment at a red light. "I just didn't think it would get this far." "You mean you didn't think I'd win?" My voice was calmer than I felt. When we got home, he followed me inside like a man trespassing in his own house. He stood near the doorway, feet unsure, like he was still waiting for directions that would make him useful again. That's when it hit me. He didn't fight because he couldn't. He didn't fight for me, because somewhere along the way, it stopped being us against the world, and became him choosing not to rock the very ship I had been drowning in. I once loved him. Loved the way he tucked Micah in, the way he licked icing off his thumb when baking cookies. But love without protection isn't love. It's performance. You blinked, I finally said. When it mattered most, you just blinked. He didn't try to stop me when I walked past him. Didn't reach out or ask what that meant or where we stood now. He just stood there, blinking. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel discarded. I felt free. Exactly 33 days after the trust meeting, I sent out the invitation. It was worded simply, "Micah's birthday celebration. Glenmount, no pomp." No fancy script fonts or RSVP software, just a plain text reminder distributed to family emails. I included the address, the date, and one sentence beneath it. "Please be on time. We'll begin at noon sharp." They all thought it was a joke. That somehow I was borrowing the place for the day. That maybe my little moment of power would pass now that the legal dust was settling. None of them believed I was capable of keeping something they had already decided was theirs. So when they pulled up to Glenmount, dressed in quiet couture, fresh manicures, and guarded smiles, I watched them blink at what stood beyond the gravel drive, because it wasn't a forgotten, rustic family cabin anymore. It was a polished estate, fully renovated, modern siding balanced with preserved original brickwork, expansive glass windows facing the lake, manicured gardens blooming early with spring crocuses. The porch had been expanded, strung with soft hanging lanterns, and a new cobblestone path lined with solar lights guided guests from the parking circle to the entry. And just before the front steps, mounted on a curved black iron frame, sat a gleaming brass plaque. They all stopped to read it. The Legacy Project, in honor of a grandfather's vision. Trustee, Evelyn R. Bennett, beneficiary, Micah E. Bennett Est. 2023 I. Watched their expressions change like a slow eclipse. The cousins looked confused. My sister-in-law's lips tightened into a flat line, and my mother-in-law, dressed in pearls and posture, looked like she was trying not to choke on her own breath. Only Micah smiled, tugging gently on my sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, "they're looking at the sign." I leaned down and said just loud enough for him, and them, to hear. "They're finally seeing what was always yours." The house opened up into a long, sunlit space filled with warm blues and natural wood accents. A team of local caterers greeted guests near the patio, where a table held Micah's cake. No cartoon characters, no logos, just his name in cursive, carved into chocolate with gold trim. Every choice was his. Every color, every detail. Because for once, the room was his. Not borrowed, not permitted, owned. No one asked questions at first, not directly. They mulled around with small plates, complimenting the chandeliers and the lake view, too afraid to ask how I pulled it all off. Then, during the toast, my mother-in-law finally broke. She raised her glass, eyes sweeping the polished kitchen. "This must have taken some planning," she said coolly. "Did you hire a decorator or—" I smiled. I oversaw the renovation myself. Glenmount is our full-time property now. We're relocating in the fall once Micah's out of school. Her hand trembled slightly as she lowered her champagne. I wasn't finished. There's already an education grant tied to the home, part of the trust. It'll cover any school he chooses. And within 5 years, this space will double as a youth creative retreat, under Micah's name. For kids like him, the overlooked ones. Gwendolyn set her drink down hard. "And who approved?" "No one had to," I replied. "I'm the trustee." And then I turned to Micah. "Sweetheart, would you like to say hello?" He walked up shyly in his little navy suit, waved, and simply said, "Thank you for coming," like the gentleman I raised. And just like that, the reversal was complete. Because for the very first time in our lives, they were the guests, no longer gatekeepers. No longer rulers of whispered rooms and broken place cards, just people with the wrong last name on a plaque they didn't even know existed 6 weeks ago. They stood inside our walls now. And they would leave knowing everything had changed, not with rage, not with drama, but with dignity and power. He waited until the last guest left to corner me in the Glenmount kitchen. The party had just ended. Plates were scraped clean, laughter still hung like leftover tinsel in the air. And Micah was upstairs, happily flipping through books on his new window seat. Outside, the sky was sliding into dusk, warm and golden, that quiet hush between daylight and dark. And then there he was, standing near the island like he still belonged there, like the space hadn't made its choice already. "Can we talk?" he asked, voice low. I didn't answer right away. Just folded a napkin in half and placed it neatly into an empty tray. My movements were slow, careful. I wasn't rushing through this anymore. He stepped closer, dropping his voice even further. "I know things got complicated, but now that everything's finally coming together, maybe we should press pause on everything, at least for Micah's sake." Micah's sake. The irony tasted metallic. "You mean the divorce," I said. He nodded quickly, like it was obvious. "We're in a good place now. The house is done. You proved your point. Maybe this doesn't have to be permanent." I turned to face him fully and held his gaze. I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm building something. There's a difference. He swallowed hard. You're upset. I get it. The meeting was... No, I interjected, calm and clear. The meeting was the mirror. And you blinked. Again. He flinched like I'd thrown something at him, but I didn't stop. You let your mother speak for you. You watched your family belittle your child, and every single time I looked to you to say anything, you lowered your eyes and asked me to be the bigger person. His fingers tapped against the counter, restless, defensive. You're right, he said, half-whisper. I should have said more. I opened the drawer beside me and pulled out a manila envelope, already signed. Divorce papers. His hand hovered in midair as I extended it. For a second, he looked like he might cry. But not the kind that comes from heartbreak, the kind that comes from losing something he always assumed would stay. I already had it notarized last week, I said. There's nothing left to negotiate. He stared down at the papers, then at me. You're serious. I have never been more serious in my life. He tried one last time. Evie, come on. Micah needs us. No, Micah needs me. He needs stability. He needs someone who doesn't flinch when it's time to protect him. He needs to see strength not just in property lines and trust funds, but in the people who raise him. I stepped closer, my voice soft now. I begged you for years to see what was happening. Not just to me, to him. You chose not to. And I learned the hard way that if you won't fight for us, I have to fight without you. He looked at me like he didn't recognize who he was staring at. Good, because I wasn't who I was when we met. I wasn't a girl hoping to be let in. I was a woman with an exit. A mother building a world, not waiting to be invited into one. He didn't stop me when I walked upstairs. He didn't follow, didn't raise his voice, didn't argue, just accepted it, the way he'd accepted everything else, and that was the final straw. He wouldn't fight for us. But I'll fight for my son. Every time. The sun was just starting to dip when I stepped outside. The late spring wind skimmed gently across the surface of the lake, quiet enough that it barely disturbed the stillness. Glenmount didn't look like it did when we first saw it. It felt different now, like it had shed the memory of neglect and grown into something that finally knew its own worth. I walked barefoot through the dewy grass, down the short path that led to the small wooden bench tucked beneath the old oak tree. It was the only thing on the property that hadn't been touched during the renovation. I made sure of that. The bench had always been my father-in-law's favorite spot. He used to sit here with his tea, staring at the water, saying nothing at all. The old man had a way of holding space with such quiet that you eventually filled it for him. On the morning the renovations finished, the project manager handed me a sealed envelope. The previous owner asked us to place this under the seat, he said. Said it wasn't to be opened until everything was done. I never told anyone about the note, not even Micah. Not until now. I sat down on the bench, felt the grain of aged cedar beneath my palm, and held that small envelope in my fingers. The paper was yellowing at the edges. My name, written in neat, careful script, Evie. I inhaled once before unfolding it. I saw how they treated you. That day, Micah offered me part of his cookie, and your mother-in-law snatched him by the wrist before he could... I knew. And still, you stayed gracious. I never said thank you for that. But I want you to know I chose this place not to punish them, but to protect you. You were always stronger than them. Quieter, yes, but stronger. Give your boy what both of you deserve, not their approval. Never that. Give him legacy. GBI didn't cry, though for a long time I thought I might. I just sat there, letting the wind move around me, letting the echo of his words settle into the bones of that bench and into the part of me that had wondered, privately, painfully, whether I'd overreacted all these years, whether I'd been too sensitive, too critical, too aware of the quiet disrespect they all claimed wasn't there. But now I knew. I had been right. Not just about the comment, the gifts, the silences, but about everything. About the rot that hides beneath politeness. About the strength it takes to stay soft in a house that wants to harden you. I folded the letter and placed it back where I'd found it. Then I sat back and stared at the water, knowing Micah was somewhere upstairs, safe, warm, and deeply asleep in a house that belonged to him. The bench creaked just slightly beneath me, as if agreeing, and in the stillness, surrounded by wind and water and grief that had settled into peace, I whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." The day of the interview felt like destiny finally circling back with an overdue apology as I walked into the oak-paneled admissions office of St. Bellamy's Academy, the same school where I once scrubbed scuff marks off trophy cases and picked up discarded Latin textbooks the elite kids couldn't be bothered to read. I wasn't nervous. I was calm, focused, ready. My son sat beside me, his small hand wrapped around mine. His tie was a little crooked, and his shoes were polished within an inch of their lives. He looked so much like his father, and yet he belonged entirely to me. Every breath of him was mine. Every dream in his chest had been planted and watered by my sleepless nights, my sacrifices, my rage, and my love. The admissions director, Mrs. Langford, welcomed us with a clipped smile. Polished, restrained, the kind of woman who could smell generational wealth from across a marble hallway. "Ms. Rivas, thank you for coming in. And this must be Elias." He gave his best manners smile, that sweet blend of charm and sincerity he got from my mother. She scanned his application again. "You're applying through the new Legacy Scholarship program launched this year, correct?" I nodded. There was a pause. Her voice turned deliberately polite. "Can I ask, this legacy, what does it refer to?" "I only ask because we're always curious about the stories behind these foundations." I tilted my chin ever so slightly. This was the moment. I had waited so many years, not just for revenge, not just to prove anything, but for this quiet kind of justice. Not in a courtroom, not in a screaming match, but right here, in a room built for people who used to walk past me like I was invisible. "He's the heir to a property trust," I said evenly. Her eyebrows went up just slightly. Not enough to be rude, just enough to register surprise. "Real estate? Multiple properties. Commercial and residential. Some of them used to belong to the Renshaw estate." I let that name hang in the air like a weight. Her expression flickered. Recognition. "And perhaps curiosity. I see. And your connection?" I smiled. I didn't rush it. "His grandfather," I said softly, "was Charles Renshaw." Now her eyes fully lifted. "Oh," she said. I leaned in just a fraction, still smiling. "And I used to be the maid." The room went still. There it was in the shift, not loud, not dramatic, just that slow recognition unfolding behind her eyes. I could practically hear her recalibrating the story in her mind, the mental math of someone trying to understand how a Maid's son had a legacy scholarship, tied to millions in assets. "I'm sure you'll find my son's test scores and recommendations are well above the admissions threshold, but I didn't want there to be any confusion. His background isn't just numbers on paper." She blinked, still polite. Maybe a little impressed, maybe shocked, maybe both. "Well, thank you for clarifying," she said. "We appreciate your honesty." I reached for Elias's hand again and gave it a small, affirming squeeze. He looked up at me, completely unaware of just how much had happened in that room. But I knew. I had walked in as a former servant and left as the mother of a legacy. And as we exited the building, I didn't look back, because the past no longer had any power over me. It now belonged to my son's story. Christmas used to fill me with a tight kind of dread. For years, I pretended it didn't matter that no one saved a seat for me at the big table. I swallowed the cold glances, the passive remarks, the way they'd wrap empty boxes and call them decoration, just like they treated me, present but meaningless. Always in the room, never really invited in. But this year was different. The tree was smaller, a little crooked, with mismatched ornaments and one string of lights that flickered uncertainly near the top. There were no catered trays, no designer gift wrap, no glassy-eyed toasts in rooms too big and too full of secrets. Instead, our living room was warm. Lived in, full of quiet laughter and real joy. My friends, my chosen family, gathered around the modest table we decorated ourselves. There was music playing from my old phone speaker, and the smell of cinnamon and laughter hung in the air. Elias sat cross-legged in front of the fireplace, his eyes bright beneath twinkling lights as he reached for the last gift. To anyone else, it looked humble, a soft brown paper parcel tied with string. But his reaction told you everything. He peeled away the wrapping carefully, reverently, until he saw it. A hand-stitched notebook with his name embroidered on the leather cover, made by one of our friends who'd been in and out of shelters for years. Someone who told me, "This is the first time I felt useful at Christmas." I had slipped a letter inside the front page. Written late one night when the house was still and motherhood felt too big to carry alone. He opened it quietly, and I watched as his little brow furrowed while reading. Then he just looked at me, said nothing. He didn't need to. He knew. That silent moment between us, that's what it's all for. That's everything. I used to believe family was something you were born into. Something that, even when it broke you, still held power because of its name. But now I understand. Family isn't who shares your blood. It's who shows up when it matters. It's who stands beside you when you have nothing, and who stays when you finally start to rise. The Renshaws used my name behind my back. They twisted it, mocked it, erased it in rooms I'd never been allowed to enter. I was the secret. The low story, disposable. But I kept quiet, not out of weakness, but out of strategy. I took their silence and made it my foundation. I didn't shout, I built. I didn't fight to be invited. I created a place I never had to leave. So now, as my son laughs in a handmade sweater, as my friends sip hot chocolate from chipped cups, I finally understand the weight of dignity. It's not about status. It's not about vengeance. It's about peace, the kind you earn when you stop trying to prove you're worthy and start knowing you are. The fire crackled softly beside me as I leaned back, watching the glow dance across Elias's face. He was safe, whole, loved, and nothing they could say or take or whisper anymore could reach us up here. They used my name behind my back. But I used my silence to build something louder,